Welcome to Footnotes, a behind-the-scenes look at what we value and why it matters here at Foothill Church in Glendora, California.
All right, well, we are back at it today with our friends Ike and Bryan. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Steven.
Hey, man.
Hey,
Hey, Isaac.
Bryan. Oh, Bryan. What's up, man?
Oh. All right, so there's that. Ike is our worship minister, and Bryan is our student minister. Welcome back, guys. We're dipping our toe back into a little bit of pop culture today, and we're talking about actually WandaVision, which just recently streamed on Disney Plus, and probably also important just to state right off the bat that this will actually contain spoilers. So. Yeah. We're not going to do this whole version without trying to. That'd just be really difficult. So,
But you should have watched it by now.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, you've had at least a month to finish it. So, everything's on the table here. And so, yeah, if you haven't seen WandaVision yet, go back home, watch the series, and then listen to this podcast. So, spoiler alert. WandaVision released January 15th of this year and released in weekly episodes. Actually, let's talk about that for a minute. Do you guys enjoy watching kind of what Disney Plus has been doing with Mandalorian and WandaVision in terms of like an episode at a time, or do you prefer more of that Netflix just data dump?
So personally, I kind of hate it. I mean, like I don't have any patience, and so I want to watch
Plus
the whole
one?
show.
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Yeah.
We're in 2021, man.
Sure,
I want to watch
sure.
the entire thing like now.
You're very entitled, Bryan, but that's okay.
Yeah, give it to me now.
Yes. I want it right now.
But I do think it added a lot to the enjoyment of watching it in week by week. I mean, you get that whole like you talk about with your buddies,
Sure,
you watch the
yeah.
stuff. It gave me something to look forward to in my dull life, and so yeah, I thought.
You just had a baby. What are you talking about? You're dull on life. Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'll take the high road. I love.
Wow. Okay.
No, but first thing, for the sake of the artists, they put like Stranger Things. They put so much work and heart into the shows, and people just go fly through it.
Sure.
And they're like, I don't even remember what episode that was. It was, and all they can remember is like the very beginning and the end. And I also, there's a lot of memes of like. You see these memes of a couple, a married couple in bed, and she's like, "I wonder what he's thinking about, something really terrible," and he's like trying to figure out the last episode of his TV show or something like that. But I sit there and I think about shows, and it gives me a chance to kind of work through it, and I appreciate it more that way.
You're right.
I think I'm just a little bit deeper and more appreciative about things in general.
You're very.
I'm just a better person than Bryan is.
Well, he did start that off by saying, "I'm going to take the high road." So.
Yeah.
Literally. Like.
Oh, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm more mature.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like Ike. Yeah.
It's time for my nap, dude.
Yeah, I think that I would also probably there's a sense that I would love to see them all, but I do think that forcing us to slow down on the pace and watch it over time is better for me personally. Let's get to it though. WandaVision, just general thoughts. Did you guys enjoy the series? Was it something that you enjoyed watching it, or just even after the fact?
I was so thankful for it because it was bold.
Yeah.
Hollywood had been just rebooting things forever, and I think with every episode, every new Marvel show, every new movie, I kind of feel like they did with Star Wars. They kind of gave us everything we ever wanted, like new Star Wars movies, all these comic book characters coming to life. I'm getting so saturated, and so when I saw this, like really, like what on earth are they doing here? I could almost imagine somebody saying, let's do this, but really, when I saw that sitcom idea, man, that was bold. So I loved it.
I really enjoyed watching it. I had a fun time. Going every week and watching it with Steph. That was kind of like our little, sad date night. But it was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Bryan, we're gonna have to be careful because you've already described your life as being really bad in other settings too. So,
love you, babe. Going back though, I watched it again a little bit, and I think it was good. I mean, for the first like Disney Plus series that they put out there, solid. I think there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of nitpicks that I have. I think I'm pretty like snobby though when it comes to TV, so I don't think it was perfect by any means. But yeah, it was a really fun, good watch for sure.
Yeah,
and I think actually when you're that bold of the show like that, there will be more holes, and that's almost like if I were the executive producer like hat on. That's something. That's a risk you take.
I actually don't think they were that bold. I think it seemed so kind of out there, but the more you got into it, the more you're like, oh, this is kind of like they actually played it pretty safe considering when you get to the end. Like if we talk more spoilers and stuff, I thought they were going to go further and they didn't.
I did feel like they could have kind of like hung on to the mystery of of not allowing people to see behind the curtain a little bit for another episode or two. That'd been kind of fun to see how long they would have strung that out a little bit. But yeah, like you talked about the format a little bit, but just even thinking about moving from decade to decade through TV, did that make it nostalgic for you at all for your youth? Like, what was your favorite TV shows growing up as a kid?
Yeah, well, I kind of just, when you're a kid, you kind of just a lot of times watch what your parents watch.
Yeah.
And my mom was a huge, like, I Love Lucy fan. So apparently it was based, I think, on the Dick Van Dyke Show, which for some reason I hadn't seen that as much. But yeah, it made me just kind of appreciate, they worked really hard even to get the humor timings down.
Mm-hmm.
And people laughed at stuff differently.
Yeah.
I remember when Jessica, she lived in Thailand for a little while, teaching English and doing things. And she said people there were still loving slapstick comedy when we had all moved on to sarcasm.
Right.
So it was refreshing just to see something done in a different style. So I like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I noticed immediately was just how the actors, they pivoted really well to being in each session, like in each decade anyway. I was just like, wow, they're actually pretty decent actors.
They obviously looked really good in the older style. Like you could tell, like the way that they're built, their facial structure, her hair,
right.
like they really serve that older style really well. And I think it's probably what was good at work. They worked kind of chronologically.
Yeah.
For
They
sure.
got the aesthetics down really, really well. That was fun to watch. All the theme songs and stuff were cool. The commercials,
Right.
all that stuff is really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of step back a little bit and just talk more broadly about this. Brian, maybe give us the description. So what is WandaVision and how does it fit into the current kind of overall MCU universe?
Yeah, so you mentioned this earlier. So it's on Disney Plus. So this is, if you follow the MCU, they know they did this in phases. So like phase 1 is when they started things off with Iron Man. They capped it off with Avengers. Then they got further and further. This is phase 4, where they're doing a lot of their content on Disney Plus on their exclusive streaming service. And this is the first one to launch it. Chronologically, this takes place after Avengers Endgame. So if you're watching that, the whole thing with Thanos, that whole saga ends. And this kind of deals with the ramifications of what happened in their story. And so the main characters are Wanda Maximoff and Vision, and it kind of follows their whole story. And so it starts off, like we said, things are really weird out of nowhere. They're in a sitcom, and it keeps changing eras, totally different from everything else we've seen in the MCU. So it's kind of this mystery wrapped in the whole superhero show. And again, yeah, I thought they did a good job.
Yeah, for sure. Did you guys know much about those characters, Vision and Scarlet Witch, beforehand?
I had Marvel trading cards growing up.
Oh, you did?
They're called the Marvel Masterpieces.
Yeah.
Joe Jusko drew them. They're phenomenal. Like they still hold up really well. But frankly, I mean, I kind of knew of them.
Yeah.
But all these people act like, oh yeah, I knew. I think most people are lying.
I agree. I call BS on that too.
Exactly. And you know why? It's because of YouTube.
Yeah.
And these guys on YouTube, it's like 10 million views, like 9-minute recap, and the guys are quoting stuff like, "There's no way you're like 16 years old."
Right. I feel like you're really passionate about this. Is there somebody you want to call out personally right now? Like, is there somebody by name you want to say?
It's the same. You know what it is actually? It's actually a frustration because I felt like I was into this stuff and I don't know it. It's like when you play video games against a young kid and he whoops you. You're like, you're just good because you do this all day.
Right.
I'm tying into that like frustration.
Yeah,
I'm letting go of that part of my life.
It's like they're getting all the benefit of the knowledge without doing all the hard work. Like we're like staring at our Nintendo Power magazines, trying to figure out how to do the code.
Yeah. Back in my day, I got made fun of for reading this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now it's cool.
Well, I mean, that's been a big shift overall. I mean, this whole MCU thing, it's been talked about quite often. But for me as a kid, I was super into X-Men, super into like Batman and Superman, and I mean, it was a part of pop culture, but it was fringe in a lot of ways too. And how about as far as just even looking at the whole series in general? What were some, speaking of like kind of some nerd out moments for you guys? Was there any kind of moments in an episode that really stood out?
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned it. The theme songs, like every time they chose a different kind of sitcom from a different era. Somebody literally went out and studied all like the shows that time, and they wrote this little short minute and a half. They would have spent a lot of time of it just to get that small benefit.
Yeah. There's a lot of Disney money there, right there.
It was,
they have some resources there.
But yeah. So there's guys who probably like maybe would have got third place on the bid to get that one show. But maybe I don't know. Actually, I'd like to see who did it, but I think they did a great job with that.
The music.
Yeah, and I think a thoughtful moment really was actually the last episode when we had spoiler.
Yep.
Is the new Vision when the two Visions talk to each other. And so many times you have like somebody shares a really good truth, the good guy, the bad guy's like hears it and goes, no, I'm just going to kill you, kind of mentality. But no, the other Vision says, I request elaboration, and they have a good conversation, and they come to an agreement. Like that just made me happy inside. Good fuzzy feelings. I thought that was wonderful. Just a change pace.
That is cool for sure. Yeah. Going off what you said, I mean, Malcolm in the Middle is one of my favorite shows, and the fact they did the whole Malcolm in the Middle tribute was really cool. And it was fun to see. It was like, dude, that is 100% totally Malcolm in the Middle. That was great. Obviously, the Pietro thing when he shows up, isn't it? It's an episode at the end of episode 5, I think. Is that what it is? Where the Quicksilver Pietro from the X-Men universe.
He was good in that X-Men.
He's
like,
great.
He was really likable.
Evan Peters is awesome.
That slow down scene, like that was a hilarious, amazing.
Was
scene.
that the first time that had happened? Where
where they had the crossover.
That was really a great clip for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, kind of a bummer how they bait and switched everybody. I think that's one of the reasons why some were left with a sour taste at the end of the series. But I thought it was really cool.
In the end, it was better because
I don't know, man.
Did they leave the door open though for a little bit of a? I mean, perhaps through Scarlet Witch's powers at the end, she could create still this kind of So to be more explicit, I mean, it's with Pietro showing up that way.
Right.
It teased the sense that would there be a crossover to the X-Men universe a little bit?
Well, I think so because they're already talking about the Spider-Man movie coming out soon, where they're going to have all the guys who played Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
All those guys coming together. Part of me almost thinks there's a business decision. They kind of just want to see how excited people get.
Yeah.
And if people really freaked out over this little fan service, like it's a bait and switch. They're like, let's just see how much people freak out. And if it's really good, okay, we're going to throw them
It does feel like MCU almost needs a little bit of it's crazy to say this because they're so successful, but some kind of change up and by infusing X-Men characters into the MCU, it would be pretty neat, in my opinion.
Yeah, people would go crazy. I don't think they're going to do it. I think the Spider-Man thing, they've already confirmed they're going to have that multiverse, but it's going to go back to Sony in a couple of years, so they're going to do their own thing. Doctor Strange has his whole, like, the madness of the multiverse, so there'll be some stuff in there for sure, but I think they're going to start from scratch.
So it just ended up being more of a cameo then for Quicksilver.
Yeah, I mean, it was that joke at the end that they did, yeah.
Well, so obviously one of the big kind of theme throughout this whole series, and without kind of having to lay it all out each episode at a time, but it becomes apparent through the series that this world is kind of an illusion, obviously, that Wanda has created to deal with grief over losing Vision in... Was that in Endgame or was that in
Infinity War? Yeah. So what's crazy is she kills him to save the day,
right.
And then Thanos brings him back to life, and then he kills him all over again.
Yeah. So obviously, I think this is kind of where, for me anyway, I was watching the series. I watched it with my son Owen and Katie, and we very much enjoyed it, and it was a great experience. But then it started turning this kind of page towards, oh, she's actually really dealing with some really serious stuff. And I thought we definitely kind of shift even just our conversation over to like just how we in general just distract ourselves from feeling things. You know, I think it's almost kind of an interesting question. If you had unlimited resources and ability to distract yourself from grief or feeling pain, like how would you deal with that? You know, and what are some of the ways that we do that even in our own lives?
Oh yeah, I think we do things like we just dive into things like WandaVision.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, and obviously it's totally okay. We should enjoy arts. I think there's beauty in that, and I think that's a God's grace on humanity to create things and do that. But we dive in, we binge. I think Netflix actually was very smart when they made things available right away. Is that they just like someone who just wants to kind of escape, they can just do that. And I've shared this a couple of times, but you know, I think Louis C.K., the comedian, even kind of talked about we dive into social media. But there's one time he just said, "I'm just going to withhold from all these things I distract myself with," and he just sat there for 20 minutes in his car. And he just started crying, and the audience started laughing at him. He's like, you know, the thing was, though, it was beautiful. I needed it because he didn't realize how long he'd been kind of just pushing aside. So. Yeah, in a way, she was doing that. She was kind of just distracting herself.
Yeah, I think it's poignant too that it was a cheap imitation, right? And so one of the things we find out is that she kind of creates this vision out of thin air of her like own anguish and grief, and these kids kind of come out of that too. But it's just a cheap imitation. It's not the real vision. It's not this real thing. And I think sometimes we do that too, right? Like, I don't know, if someone's going through a breakup, there's that temptation to go for a rebound or to go for something where you get kind of like the feeling that you have something without kind of going through the full thing. And yeah, we totally do that. I think distractions is a huge thing. It's hard for us to deal with our grief. It's hard for us to kind of like to do this out in the open. And so anything that we can just get kind of like the feeling of it without the actual substance there is definitely something that we run to. And I think we see that a lot with students, right? They go to social media to have the feeling of inclusion, to have the feeling of this adventure without like really building these relationships. And so they kind of live vicariously through other people, and it's hollow.
Yeah. Yeah, I also was struck by the fact that like Wanda herself, I wasn't sure if by the end she was self-aware the whole time, or if she kind of became a little bit more jogged in a memory of like, oh, this is actually what I've done. And I think that's the same for us too, as we kind of distract ourselves from feeling things, from feeling pain, from feeling discomfort. Are we actually even aware that we've dove into like how, is that question of like,
I think you're coming upon something that's happening on social media right now.
Yeah.
I think she wasn't really self-aware, but then when she saw the people's faces.
Yeah.
She realized this isn't good what I'm doing. And I think that's the problem with social media. We've talked about this a lot, but if you're not seeing the people, so you can actually just keep digging your hole and making it worse and worse. But if you could be face to face with the people, you would say, "Oh no, I'm gonna cut this out," or they will cut it out.
Right.
Yeah, they're literally actors in her own mini universe, and they just stopped losing all their sentience. And so you're right. She has that moment. She's like, they're not hurting; they're at peace. And it's like no, that's not the case. Right. You're like you're torturing us. Wanda's the bad guy. She's the real villain, I think, in this story.
Is. And even these influencers that kids are looking at and think, I want to be them. We don't see them. We basically just see their little facade.
Yeah.
Right.
And I thought that was very poignant when she saw their faces.
Yeah, I think the impact of kind of grief on community. I mean, think about just if any of us three would go through something really hard, lose a family member, or kind of deal with a sickness, or it's going to have an impact on our kids, on our spouses, on the church that we're in. And so I just thought it was interesting to kind of see this very secular look at how people deal with grief. And yet there's some very kind of truisms from Scripture about how, man, there's some things that really impact community. I mean, you guys were just talking about it, but the entire city of Westview was transformed by Wanda's grief, and they were kind of living this lie themselves. They had to kind of keep up, and when there was this kind of like stop, like pause moments, they would literally just break down crying just because they were so overwhelmed by like them being kind of entrapped a little bit. Have you guys seen that personally too? Just like the impact of grief on community?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a Toby Mac song, speak life, but it's from Proverbs, basically Toby Mac reference. Hey, bro, if you're listening, man, love your work. Thank you for what you've done for Christian music. But basically, I'm a firm believer. We're either encouraging people, we're either bringing our community up, or we're kind of bringing it down. I don't really think there's much of a neutral. I think sometimes when we think we're neutral, we're actually bringing it down. Just
to put you guys on the spot a little bit, I mean, can you guys even think of a time in your own life where maybe community was impacted by just hardship that you went through personally, or you were affected by somebody else's grief?
Yeah, so a little bit off what you're talking about, but when I was in high school, there was this really weird string of like a couple years where there was a few deaths at the school. And so there was one kid who committed suicide. There was another kid who died in a car accident, and someone who was sick. And so every time you kind of see, it kind of shook up the whole community. Even if we didn't know these people, the fact was like, we saw them at the very least, or we knew of them. And for some of us, it was our friends. And the entire school, you kind of get this feeling of like, what do we do with this? I mean, we're adolescents, we're like, in our teens and stuff. And I think few things kind of give a feeling of helplessness as grief, as like a death. Because, how many times when you hear something happen and like all you can do now, I still feel kind of like, what do I say to these people? Like, if there's anything I can do, how can I help you? Right. But there's kind of that emptiness there. And so, I remember feeling that in high school of like, seeing how different people coped. Some just cried, some tried to make crass jokes to make it feel like we can move on from this. Other people just felt like, I don't know what to do with this. So I'm just going to doesn't apply to me. I'm going to focus on my schoolwork and stuff. And so you feel this kind of like, death is wrong. It's not how it should be. And so there's this thing in us that's like, it's unnatural. We don't know how to deal with it. And I think that brings us to the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris, I'll probably butcher it, but I always love how he shares at a funeral that there's a reason that death feels wrong.
Right.
Like we are made to eventually live in eternity with Christ, and there's like this sense of longing for something different.
Yeah. And
the older I get, when you're young, you're just like, oh God, please don't, take me or come back before I can get married and have kids, or see Star Wars rebooted, or whatever, But when you get older and you actually wisen up and you see people go through really, really real stuff, man, I long for the redemption. I long for the return of Jesus. Yeah,
another area where we kind of saw on the show just how grief impacted other people was how Wanda tried to create this bubble for her kids, even too. And you guys are both parents, and can that relate to our parenting? Just as thinking about even, I wonder about even the pandemic, just kind of like trying to trying to preserve some semblance of normal or protection for our kids during hard times.
I definitely don't want a really small bubble, but what I do want, I want like a bubble with a little bit of a little doorway, a small doorway, where it's kind of like where you can kind of watch things, let your kid experience things, but you can be there very presently to have a very good discussion about it. Mm-hmm. Like Gabriel started playing soccer over in Upland, and some of the stuff he hears, because he's 11 years old and the kids are up to 14, all kinds of stuff being talked about. Yeah. I'm just so glad that I get to drive him, and it's like a 20-minute drive with traffic or 25 minutes, and we can just actually talk about this stuff. And sometimes I love seeing his eyes when he realizes I'm not afraid to talk about stuff with him. Yeah. Like even sometimes, like, what does this swear word mean? I'm like, oh, hey, let me just tell you.
Right.
And then this is what we think, and this is how you're going to feel. You're going to feel different, but this is why we think. And let me just tell you, you're going to feel so much more richer.
Right.
But,
so you're saying it's an opportunity for just dialogue and just kind of like getting things on the table.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I said, I think controlled amounts is helpful. Yeah. Vaccines are so hot right now, right? But I think like
they're so
they're all the rage.
They're all the
really?
rage.
Are you serious?
but really, it's kind of the mentality of like,
what
does a vaccine do? You get a little bit of it, and the body learns how to fight it. Yeah, that's kind of a parenting philosophy that Jessica and I have, is want to allow a little bits in so we can kind of work on it. Mm-hmm. But obviously, you don't allow like really small amounts of really dumb things in.
We take the same philosophy, so we let Shep watch R-rated movies. To show him. So
well, you start there and then you go down from there. Yeah,
I applaud you.
Yeah, just kidding. He's 2 years old. He thinks ice cream is yogurt. So he's still very much in the bubble.
But I mean, obviously, you do have a finger on the pulse of just students, and even just speaking to some parents right now. I think that there's some parents who may even feel a little helpless when it comes to, okay, there's this thing that's happened in our school, or just in this context of pandemic, and parents don't know how to equip their kids or engage them, thoughtfully.
Yeah, I think what Ike said is so key. It really just does come down to open and honest communication. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying like, hey, bud, I don't know if we're ready to talk about this thing yet, but kids are gonna remember. I was just talking to a parent about this recently. Like, they're gonna remember the conversations. They may not remember every single thing you say, but they're gonna remember you taking time out to talk to them and kind of like train them through, because we have this picture now that's been brewing in pop culture for a long time of the parent versus the teenager. But this is very antithetical, I think, to how the Bible portrays parenting. Like, it's this idea of a parent walking their child through, showing them the way in which they should go. And so, hey, every teenager wants to know things. Every teenager has questions. And if you kind of buy into that story of shame and distance where they're not going to go to you, then they'll buy into that story also. But they're going to get their answers somewhere. They're going to go to Google. They're going to go to their friends. But if you kind of build this idea of like, look, man, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to talk. Yeah. And if you make this like, it's a little bit on the parent to kind of do this regular thing. Like what you do, Ike, of like just driving with them is huge. When they have that structure of like, hey, every Thursday, we're going to spend half an hour, we're going to talk about those things. Eventually that stuff will be, it'll be occupied. They'll talk because they do want to know. They want to understand, and they want to have a safe space. It's so scary to ask questions. And so don't let Google parent your kids. Like, be there, and eventually they'll open up to it for sure.
And that's really sustainable long term. I mean, it's in some ways it's not realistic for Wanda to keep her kids in a bubble for this whole eventually they're going to grow up and find out, like, and it's going to all be a lie.
Totally,
so it's better to kind of pop that bubble earlier,
and that builds resentment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kids, so I guess parents shouldn't tell their kids about Santa Claus either, right? That's probably also on the same thing here too.
Well, way to decide are these games or beliefs, and that's that's the great discussion.
That's good. Well, we already talked about it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more explicitly to, as Christians, we grieve differently. As Christians, we have a hope in the future that the non-believers don't even grasp. And so, how does the Bible point us as Christians to grieve, and how is that different from the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, I mean, it says it, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And I think we're also told, too, that the big aspect of this is that we're told to do this in community, right? If one of you is mourning, like, you go around and you be a part of this with them. And so, I think there's so many different ideals that our culture has of, like, we go to things to numb our pain, or we do it on our own because we're strong enough. But the Bible is really, really clear. Like, we were built to be in community. And so if someone is grieving, it should be done in community, because I don't think we're equipped to do this on our own. Right. And it's really easy to be like, okay, well, hey, I'm sad about I'm grieving something, but it's not like, my spouse and my kids died, maybe it's something on a smaller scale. That doesn't mean like you should still be a part of that in your community. And so that's why we stress things like being in a growth group, being in like some kind of gospel-centered community, because you don't know when these things are going to strike, right? And so having that already built around you is, I think, God's way of making sure that we don't go through this type of thing alone. I mean, Wanda basically goes through this thing completely alone. She shoves people away. And so you have Monica Rambeau going back and forth like, hey, let me help you. She almost has to force Wanda into it. And so Christians are almost commanded, like, hey, be a part of community in this.
Yeah, and what the other blessing of being in community when you grieve is you're reminded that the best thing you can do is actually serve somebody else. I think a lot of times when I've felt really, really sad or very inward, your first thought is, well, maybe I'll go think about this a lot, or I'll go talk to somebody about myself. But man, if you go serve somebody else, it's amazing how you start to refilter, and your problems, I don't want to say don't seem so big, but you just look at them in a different way when you help other people. Yeah. So a lot of times when my kids have been really frustrated with each other, and it's like, oh, I'm just so mad about this. I'm so sad about this. I'm like, hey, Lyric, instead of just being really sad right now, I want you to go play with Tennyson and come up with a game for him to go play with. And man, that's just so helpful. And then you come back to your problems, and there still will be a problem, but you just look at it in a new way.
Yeah. And one more real quick thing is like the big difference for us as Christians is that we have hope. Right. There's nothing worse when you're going through something terrible and somebody says like, hey, this happens for a reason, or like, hey, you'll be okay. That sounds so hollow. But the great thing is when we're Christians is like, whether it's a death or whether it's something devastating that happens, like our ultimate hope is that this is not our home. Our ultimate hope is that our Redeemer is coming back, and he will wipe away every tear, and things will get better. And so that doesn't often ease the pain right now when it happens, but it gives us something knowing like, hey, God is still sovereign. He's still in control, and I still have my hope. His grace is sufficient. And those have been words that Steph and I have really had to hold on to at times. Like, his grace is sufficient to bring us through.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we reviewed Exodus movies last month and talked about Marvel a bit today. And what are some further encouragements, even to our Foothill Church folks, about watching, engaging in pop culture with kind of scriptural eyes? Like, how do we do that regularly?
I think one thing that's important is just not to want everything to be perfectly curated for you. I like. That's the problem with social media now, is basically say, here's your viewpoint. I'm handing it to you through a phone or on a TV show. You have to realize that every show has a writer, and every writer this show has been funded by somebody. And it's actually good that we realize that everybody's kind of trying to explain and validate their own beliefs and feelings. And what we need to do is then grab that tension, say, okay, well, I don't really believe with all of that stuff. I actually need to maybe get some counsel. Hey, maybe talking to a pastor, or a good friend, your growth group, whatever, and to say, what do you think about this theme? And what scripture should I, that kind of growth, that critical thinking is so much better than just saying, I'm a this channel person and I'm a this channel person. Like, I think we do need to watch. It's good to have encouraging things come in, but you have to critically think at some point.
I think what I just heard you say, just to clarify too, is just that, hey, as Christians, one of the things that we ought not to do is just watch things passively. Like, we need to have a critical eye. We need to be able to sit down and say, what am I actually, what's the intake right now? What am I actually viewing, and what are they trying to accomplish here? Because I do think that, we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of us just distract ourselves by sit in front of the TV or a tablet and just like, I just want to check out for a little bit and not think about things.
Yeah, I would piggyback off that. I mean, there's a lot to be said about like, hey, how are we in the culture without being of the culture, without being conformed? And I think you totally said it's perfect right there. Is like, hey, as Christians, we're forced to engage with the culture, and so the way we do this is we just realize that everything is preaching to us. Every music album, every music video, every series, every movie, everything has a worldview that it's sharing. And our job as Christians is to not just go into kind of like entertainment mode. I'm pretty sure even that the Greek word amuse kind of has this idea of like turning your brain off, when we should do the opposite. It's fine for us to watch these things and to be involved, but we should kind of hear like, what is this preaching? What is this saying? How does this interact with the gospel? And I think it's kind of like, it teaches us how to learn, how to communicate. I always think we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice if we completely go like the monk way and go away from all this stuff, because it just hurts us in how to kind of engage with other people. And so I don't think we need things outside of of the gospel to share the gospel, but it does do us a disservice. We see Paul do this, right? Like, I became all things to all people. And so I do think there's also a line, though. Like, I wouldn't encourage people to watch something like Game of Thrones so they can get into their Game of Thrones friend group and share the gospel. I think discernment still plays something there.
I think what's important is to be able to answer the questions that society is going to be asking. Like right now, everybody's asking, like, what is justice?
Yeah.
Right? We read that book, just to plug that book, Plugged In by Daniel Strange. But talk about how for years the world might have been saying, well, what about this? What about this? And Christians were just saying, did you know Jesus wants to be your friend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have to be able to answer their questions. That comes from critically thinking and from applying scripture and really thinking, like, how would I take this and help people realize where the true hope is?
Yeah. It's really an age-old question as far as how much to engage in culture and still maintain your personal holiness, to maintain your convictions. And that's something that I think will continue to be a struggle for us as engaged cultural kind of missionaries of the culture. I know that's something that, I'm almost 40. That's still something I think about all the time. It's like, why am I watching this? Why am I reading this? Mm-hmm. Is it for personal enjoyment? Is it because it's just fun? Or is it to be intentional about my engagement with my neighbor because I want to know what they're knowing and what they're into?
Yeah, just be careful. I think there's a difference between engaging and adopting. And I think as Christians, we have a spiritual heritage. And so, like, hey, are you engrossed in your own heritage? Are you spending your time in the Word? What your Father thinks. And then once you have that, it's a lot easier to go and engage without adopting all these things.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about the future of the MCU? You excited for the stuff coming up?
I'm kind of in that place again of like, oh man, you're gonna have to really win me over to bring me to this show.
Oh yeah,
I'm just so saturated right now. Yeah. But then I saw a preview for Winter Soldier 1, and it showed their kind of like banter back and forth. Yeah. Like, oh, I like a good banter.
I'm nervous, man. I mean, they're gonna make money.
I love how Brian's like, it's so high stakes. You're nervous.
I'm terrified. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't know. We'll see. I had high hopes for WandaVision. Again, it's good, but there's just some things in there that were so tacky. So felt like I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at times when they were in the sword stuff. I thought it was so stupid.
Some people love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
And they're wrong. It's a bad show. But I thought it was so dumb that they made the director this like cartoon villain out of nowhere. He's the hero. Wanda Maximoff's a bad guy.
Sure.
And so they have him shoot some kids so people know he's a bad guy. No, that was dumb. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future.
Wow.
I don't know. We'll see. I'm excited for Doctor Strange.
Side note,
Spider-Man.
I do appreciate the Asian agent guy. What's his name?
Jimmy Woo.
Jimmy Woo. He was kind of fun.
He was in Always Be My Maybe, which was
you don't like him either.
No,
a fellow youth pastor, man. Fellow youth pastor.
I know. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Was he? What's this?
In Ant-Man, he had a great little line where like the guy was. I think Paul Rudd was like, "You're just so great with kids." He's like, "Yeah, I'm a part-time youth pastor on the side." And, like,
that's amazing.
It was a great job.
I only saw the second one. I didn't see the first one.
The first one's way better than the second one.
Yeah. He's really good. I really like Randall Park, Asian Jim, and I think he's really
Asian
great
Jim. That's right.
in Ant-Man. I just thought they made him kind of like, I don't know, a little too corny, but he's cool. I hope he still has a really good role. Like he can be the next Nick Coulson, like you said, or something.
Yeah.
He's a very likable
For sure.
person.
He's the most likable dude in Hollywood right now. Yeah.
Wow, that's a big statement.
Oh, somebody said that.
We should probably just end on that.
Okay.
Well, that was curated. That was curated for you.
Yeah.
You've adopted it.
Well, hey guys, thanks for being here today. Appreciate your time and talking about WandaVision. And hopefully for those of you listening, this was helpful to just even as we continue to engage in culture and think through, what does the Bible have to say about these things? And God certainly cares about what we watch and how we think about them. So thanks for being here, guys. All right. Well, we're out of time, but thanks for joining us for our podcast, Footnotes. Be sure to subscribe, and we'd also appreciate you sharing this resource with others and even leaving us a favorable review if you feel so inclined. So until next time, Foothill, peace be with you.
Next episode, Justice League, right?
Oh, Snyder Cut? Maybe, we'll see.